Oh, my name is Jennifer Harbury. I spent most of my life working down here in the Rio Grande Valley. I came down to work with legal aid as an attorney back in 1978. I had come as a summer student in 76. So I'm very familiar with the valley. I spent a lot of years in Central America also as well during the Dirty Wars, and I understand very well what it is that people are running from, the refugees that we're seeing here. Reynosa right now is one of the most dangerous cities anywhere. The United States Department of State has this region categorized as a category 4 in security. That means it's the same as Iraq and Afghanistan in terms of danger. And their recommendation, don't go there. It doesn't say be careful. It doesn't say proceed with caution. It says don't go. Border Patrol agents are told not to go here to visit their grandparents or their family. Most families live on both sides of the river with different members, and that's how it's always been, but not anymore. And any U.S. officials, Border Patrol, CBP, all of those people are told, don't go here, it's too dangerous. But instead, we've sent back thousands and thousands of families, including children, old people, people on crutches, small women with 2 babies, and we've left them here for years. We've trapped them here. The danger here is because the city is now, and has been for many years, completely controlled by the cartels and different gangs that come in and out. The army has left. The head of immigration for Reynosa, the director, back in 2018, was caught and exposed for taking $3,000 payments from different refugees that arrived here. He was having them brought from the airport down to the basement of the immigration building, the federal building, and held under terrible conditions, and they had to pay $3,000 to get out. So Univision smuggled down an Apple phone, and they were able to broadcast out live showing the conditions and the receipts for the money they were paying. And the journalists tracked down the receipts, and they went straight to the director for the whole city of Reynosa. Many people have been kidnapped by the police. They've been kidnapped and sold by the polinegros, the federales. It's just an understood, that the government is very, very linked to the to the cartels. Then that's not really a surprise, given the realities. I'm gonna have to get a glass of water. I'm sorry. Let me grab one from in here.
Yep.
It became a more and more dangerous place over the years, and finally, even the Mexican military just left Reynosa. When I was still working at legal aid, I had one family come in about their daughter who had been murdered here, and she had been a battered woman, a battered wife in McAllen for many, many years. And her husband had a serious drug problem. They were both from the same barrio here in Reynosa. They lived down the street from each other. So they'd known each other forever. But one night he tried to light their trailer on fire and burn it down over their heads, and she had 3 small children. So she went to the police and reported him, and he got deported. And the family kept calling back saying, he's going to kill you the next time. He's telling everyone he's going to kill you the next time he sees you. Don't ever come back. And she never did. She had protective orders that he was not to approach her. But one night, immigration picked her up. The police said, she was coming home from a waitressing shift with 2 friends, and she apparently went over the white dotted line, they said. I think that was just an excuse. They turned her over to immigration, and all 3 people started screaming, you can deport us, but not her. She'll get killed. That guy's trying to kill her. Don't send her back. Take us. Don't take her. But they took her. It was 2:00 in the morning. All 3 of them were begging and pleading, don't send her back, don't send her back. She was crying, and she said, let me go to the house and get my protective orders, I'll show you. But all 3 got sent back across the bridge at 6 a.m. before a judge was even in the courthouse, before any law offices were open, nothing. And to cross the river, the cartels now own the river. You have to pay a cartel fee to be allowed to cross, and back then for a Mexican living here in Reynosa, it was $1,200, and they didn't have it. So her family was rushing money over, but they found her 24 hours later. They found her incinerated in a car. She'd been tied to the steering wheel and burned to death.
Mm-hmm.
And
With the kids?
No, the kids, thank God, were not there, but she'd been grabbed the day before, and he tried to bite her ear off, and one of her children was there for that, and he was suicidal by the time he was 10.
Yeah.
So that's how bad things have gotten here. The U.S. government knows that very well. That's why we're not supposed to let any of our officials go. But I guess mothers and children don't count, if they're not U.S. citizens. But anyway, that's the background. We used to come here all the time for music and art and theater and camping, but that's gone. There is no safe place even anywhere around Reynosa. The gangs know that the refugees themselves probably don't have any money, but they know someone in the north loves them. And if they don't have any money, they'll sell their house, they'll sell their car, they'll beg, they'll go take out loans. And they do. They'll round up, $8,000-$10,000 for each person. They do it because otherwise they're dead. And everybody understands that.
Yeah.
So more and more people show up here because we're such a short distance from Central America. It's just a straight line up. It's like much less time, and it's a very safe place because it's gang controlled. It's a safe place for traffickers. So they bring everybody up and just dump them in Reynosa, where they get kidnapped left and right. Some of them have been kidnapped 2, 3, 4 times. Sometimes like one woman under MPP that we'll discuss later, she was first kidnapped with her 3-year-old son and told that if her husband didn't pay the fee, that they were going to sell her child for his organs, which is a more and more common threat, and which is very scary to me because they've got enough money to do that now, get all the right equipment and stuff. The second time, they were grabbed by a rival gang after the husband paid and got trapped in the middle of a shootout. They were arguing over who had the rights over the different people. And all of the parents put their kids down flat on the floor and laid down on top of them and prayed with the walls getting blown off. And they survived that, got to the river, crossed, and got told, now it's MPP, you have to go back and wait your turn for your court hearing. And they said what had happened. They got dumped back in Matamoros. And she was sleeping in the tent city there and got grabbed with her 3-year-old son, thrown in the back of a pickup truck, and gang raped in front of her little boy. It was next to her in the back of the pickup truck and dumped out bloody and hysterical back here in Reynosa. Then she got brought to me. They called me. And I got a friend who's an attorney to represent her, and we raised hell. How could you send her back? She's so endangered with all those kidnappings. You let her in immediately. And they said, no, she's not in danger, and send her back again. She was trapped here for years. She was suicidal, and her little boy was not all right. But those are examples of what happens to people who get trapped here. Now, of course, what the law says that's passed by Congress is that if someone is in danger in their home country, and it tracks the language of all the international treaties, but it's what Congress passed for the United States. They go cross the bridge to the port of entry office where all of us go. You turn over your documents if you have them. If you're trying to get asylum, you say, I'm in danger, I want to ask for asylum for me and my family, and they have to send you for processing. They don't say go away and come back some other day. They have to send you for processing. And they can't keep you detained if you've never committed a crime and you're no danger. They have to send you to your families to wait while you try to apply for asylum and see if you win or not. Adelante.
Te voy a abrir la ventanita para que entre lo fresco.
Se puede, pero estamos bien con el abanico.
Voy a abrir esta ventana para que
Ok. Gracias. Entonces, so those are the kinds of things that happen every hour here. It's like there's shootings a lot, but mostly you won't see it. It's just someone will go across the street to get milk for the baby and never come back. Or she'll come back and the baby's gone with the babysitter. I mean, we just never know what's going to happen, but it's completely unsafe for any families and any migrants who have an accent, who are dressed differently. God help us if they're a different color and speak a different language. Those people are just like walking dollar signs to the gangs, or they're very good what they call mercaderia, merchandise. They sell them. Young guys are really helpful passing drugs back and forth or driving the cars with people trapped in the engines to hide them. They always pass that off to low-level people working with them, right? And that's usually forced recruitment. Prostitution, obviously, male prostitution also. Those people get sold and you just never see them again. No ransom is asked for. But so anyway, those are the risks for everyone coming north. Reynosa is one of the worst cities anywhere in the United States. Has pegged it as a Category 4. So back until Trump came into office, people could go across the bridge under the U.S. statute and ask for asylum, and they had to be processed. A lot of them were deported under President Obama, and some of them were detained for much too long, and there were a lot of lawsuits about that, so that was good. But then, as soon as Trump became president, we started getting phone calls that there was disaster happening at all the cities along the border. People said, we tried to cross with our kids and we asked for asylum, and they said, no, we're not doing that anymore, go away. Or come back some other time, but they wouldn't keep a list, nothing. And they were sending everybody back. And the foot of the bridge here is the most dangerous place in the city. All the gangs are like sharks waiting for the fish to get thrown back in, right? They just wait right there and grab them. I had one woman client on a walker kidnapped at the foot of the bridge because she got sent back. And she couldn't exactly fight it off, right? I mean, down at the foot of the bridge is the most dangerous place in the city. That's like free fish to the cartels. So at any rate, that all started multiplying and getting worse and worse. And I came over and met the woman that had been kidnapped with her walker, right? And she had come in with her daughter from Guatemala, and they were in a crowded van, and the gangs chased them as they approached Reynosa. So the van flipped over, very overcrowded, and almost everyone was killed, including her 8-year-old daughter. There are photographs of this little girl lying dead in the pavement. She'd been crushed. The mother had a smashed pelvis and was almost decapitated going through the windshield, but she lived. She was in the hospital for months and left with a lot of pins in her pelvis and stuff. And she knew she had to get across. She wasn't safe here. So she went across on her walker in a lot of pain and said, that she wanted to go in for asylum. She has a lot of citizen aunts and uncles and stuff and cousins too. And they just said, no, we're busy now, come back some other time. And the room was almost empty. It's like, can hold 60 people. There were 4 or 5 people there from Cuba. So they sent her back. She's kidnapped at the foot of the bridge. And then after 2 months, her father managed to pay off the debt and they released her. And we got a posse of human rights people and internationalists together and brought her across the bridge. And we had to fight our way through to get her across, even though the law is crystal clear. Once she got out, they detained her, even though she had the medical condition, no criminal record, no danger to society, and many citizen relatives. She should have been released like that. They kept her for a year and gave her such bad medical care that her surgical site got reinfected. And she was screaming in a wheelchair when they finally released her. She almost lost her leg and she almost died. We were able to get her to California, where the doctors were so upset by the medical record, they formed a whole team and did 3 different surgeries and were able to remove the thigh bone, which was dead and filled with different bacteria that could be deadly, right? They managed to remove the bone without killing her, put in a different bone, sew it up, and slowly but surely heal her back without having her die of septicemia, blood poisoning. But that was just one example. There was another family that tried 4 times to cross. The man had a huge hole in his solar plexus, right, where he'd been shot through the stomach from Honduras because he worked on collecting money on the bus, and they just walked up and made an example of him because the bus owner wasn't paying enough to the local gang. So that was the message. He survived barely, but they kept going back and forth, and they were scared to go again because they didn't want to get grabbed at the foot of the bridge. And it's like, help us, we've got kids, what do we do? So that was another one, right? But it was just one after the other, getting just tossed back and attacked and raped and, running to their shelters and stuff. And we were like, what is going on? It's totally illegal. And it was every single major crossing. So, of course, the lawyers all get together and we wrote up our affidavits of what was happening, and they filed a huge lawsuit. And then the Trump administration sort of said, well, it was all a misunderstanding. We're not really doing that. We're not just turning them away, And then that got quieter. But then they started saying you have to wait your turn. But it was only for asylum seekers and their families. Everyone else could go into the air-conditioned waiting room with the 60 seats and the food, coin machine and the bathrooms and stuff. But if you're asking for asylum, you had to sit on the sidewalk and wait your turn in line. And they would not keep a wait list. So if you went to get food or go to the bathroom somewhere else, you would lose your place. Or you could get kidnapped trying to go back to Mexico, right, to get food. So they stayed right there, and they stayed an average of 2 weeks in the 104-degree heat, sleeping on little cardboard mats and stuff. Immigration provided no water and would not let them in to use the food machine or even to use the bathrooms, nothing. So they were just there, and all of us heard about that. All of us concerned citizens on both sides of the river, and it was really wonderful. Everyone came running with huge things of water, barrels of water, food, diapers, soap, hand cleaner, anything we could find, right? And it was still horrible, and people got really sick. Children got sick. There was a pregnant girl who'd been gang raped, who was 7 months pregnant, that looked like she was going into a coma, and we couldn't get any of them in. You have to wait your turn. You're a bad person because you tried to come up here. You should not be here, and you can send a message back where you came from. Don't come here. We're not going to let you come here to take food out of our mouths, right? And that's really hard for me to hear. My father was a refugee from World War II, right? It's like, aren't we all? I mean, I thought that was the great American way, right? Like, wasn't everybody, here on the run from something? But anyway, they would just be hideously racist. And they said, well, those poor children, they just have bad parents that have made bad choices. And I would say, you're the one making the bad choice. You're making them sit there. You're the one saying, sit there. That's not their choice. Oh, no, well, it's like they shouldn't have come up here. That was the bad choice. Then they're working with the gangs, because now the gangs run all the coyote systems. And it's like, well, that's not their fault, right? I mean, they get here any way they can. And if that's the only way to save their kids' lives, then that's how they're going to get here. Well, it's not that dangerous back home. Well, Honduras has one of the highest homicides rates in the world. Haven't you seen that anywhere? Well, I guess I have seen that, but it's all their fault. They're bad people. So that was round one. And then Trump started to take, if people cross the river instead of crossing the bridge, which is the right way to do it, of course. People on the bridge were doing it legally. People crossed the river to get their kids across and out of Reynosa. And those people are the ones that had their children taken away, which you probably remember. They just would come in the morning and say, okay, you're going to court for the misdemeanor of crossing the river. And they took the kids and forcibly dragged them away, small children, babies, toddlers, screaming and crying at the top of their lungs, and sent them somewhere else and didn't tell the parents where they sent them. And because these are all small towns, right? People started saying, I work over there. It's bad. Everyone starts screaming at 6 a.m, and they scream till it's lights out. We can't stand it. So I asked around, and a friend, we won't say anything more, brought me the tape recording of some of the children crying in there. And I gave it to Plaza Publico, and they put it out on the air, and it just went viral everywhere within an hour, because nobody could stand to hear the children crying. And one of the little girls was sobbing and saying, find my aunt. I memorized her number. Her mother, a lot of the parents make them memorize someone's number. Her name is this, this, and this, and here's her phone number. And she's breaking up and crying. But the journalist called that number, and it was the aunt. And she knew where the mother was. She was in Port Isabel, desperately trying to find her little girl. So Trump had to shut that program down within a couple of days. It was so unpopular, even with the right wing, right? No one could listen to that tape recording. But a lot of the families have never found their children. A lot of them have not been reunited. Some of the parents said, I'm in danger. And we're told, well, your kids can stay here if you go back. So they went back. And then the time came to reunify them when the law got canceled and they couldn't be found. So immigration was saying, well, I guess they don't care about their kids. And it's like, or maybe they got killed. Yeah. They told you they couldn't go back without getting killed, right? It's like, what do you think? But that's never been resolved. Anyway, that was one blip. And then at the same time, a number of us women at the bridge, just little old ladies like myself, right, started meeting each other over and over and over again, lugging bottles of water and food and stuff. And so we met at my house for a cup of coffee, and 7 of us formed the Angry Tias and Abuelas. And we're just a loose affiliation. We decided we didn't want to be 501c3. We don't want to be anything formal. We use our own cars, our own phones, our own houses. There's no office. There's zero overhead. We talk on chats all the time. And at first it was just like, tell us which town has the biggest problem. Where do they need food? Where do they need diapers? And we'd be coordinating that way. And then people started throwing money to us for food and other projects and lawyers, to help out and stuff. And now here in Reynosa, we've raised a huge amount of money, for example, to help with the construction costs of the Senda de Vida 2 center just up the road. And that's like holding 2,000 people now. It wasn't really supposed to have opened yet, but it's open now just because of the need.
So the angry grandmas are the one.
Angry tias.
The angry tias are the one who got the donations.
Well, there's many people who have donated. Mm-hmm. Angry Tias is one of the larger donors, yeah. Okay. But we're a far cry from the only ones. Okay. But
the money is coming from the community to the
yes. Everybody noticed the same thing. Pastor Hector was with, and I'll get into this more, as thousands kept coming back after they were kicked out under COVID. As thousands and thousands came back, it's like the shelters weren't enough. And they were getting killed in the streets and kidnapped and everything else. So it's like, got to build another shelter that'll hold more. The United Nations isn't coming, OIM isn't coming, the Red Cross isn't here. They waited all through the first 2 years of COVID, and they didn't even get a shipment of testing. Nothing from the international community, and you don't want to know what happened from the Mexican government, deportation centers, right? And joint programs for kidnapping. So he went out and built it himself. So all of us were like, what? And we ran around and helped raise the money. But Pastor Hector and the migrants here, who used to be in the streets, right? They went out there, cleaned out this area, and built that 10-foot wall, brick by brick with their own hands, and bathrooms and pipelines and electric stuff. All of them did it themselves, with the funding for materials sent in from private donors. None of that came from the big international networks at all. They kind of forgot about Reynosa because it's so hard to work here. But so that's aside. So anyway, after that first round of stuff, Congress got real upset and said, no more separating babies, and don't you dare put people back on the sidewalk. So Trump announced that he was paying a lot of money to the Mexican government to keep people from crossing if they shouldn't. So all of a sudden, I was walking people to the bridge and across regularly to get them past the U.S. guys that were sending them back. And all of a sudden, we couldn't even get near the bridge, even if they had papers. If they had transit visas, they would be told, no, we're putting you on a bus and sending you back to Honduras because you have a visa for 20 days. That means you can be in Mexico for 20 days. It doesn't mean you can cross the bridge and try to go to the United States and ask for asylum. There was a woman with permanent residence whose husband was Mexican and whose children were Mexican. And the guy grabbed us and said, I'm going to tear this up. You have residence to live in Mexico. You don't have permission to cross over and try to be in the United States. I'm sending you back to Guatemala with your children right now. And it's like they were born in Mexico. But it became crazy, and they would drag me back to the immigration building too. And it was just yelling and screaming and threatening. And a lot of people did get deported, or they'd get stuffed into, government houses for children, right, where they would all be stuffed in too close, and it would be very hard to get released. And most of them took deportation just to get out of there. I mean, it was a madhouse. That went on for months. And then they started saying, well, immigration here should be keeping the wait lists on the Mexican side. Now, why Mexico should keep a wait list for the United States government? It's like, since when are they our secretarial pool? We want to have a Wait in Mexico program. We can do our own work, right? But they dumped it on the Mexicans. So, of course, then the Mexican officials started charging sexual favors and $500 to get put on the list. So that was a disaster. And then we had the expose at the head of the director of immigration here in Reynosa, holding people prisoner in the basement for $3,000 each. And then they started asking Pastor Hector here, who's run this shelter at Senda de Vida for 27 years with his wife, Marilu, if he would bring people over instead of immigration. So he has a registration list and stuff. And they would call him every day and say, all right, bring 20 people from Haiti today, or bring 7 pregnant women and their families. I mean, it was very haphazard. They didn't let him have any say-so. He could only bring the ones they told him to bring. But by his values, and I have to agree, right? If the family's got to cross, that was good, right? And it was mostly families with children. So he was doing that, and he does not take bribes, and he keeps a list by date and so on and so forth. And he brought whoever they asked. So that was working very limitedly and very badly. Well, MPP got started. Under MPP, are we doing okay?
Yeah.
Under MPP, everybody got routinely sent back to Mexico, and with a little stub of paper saying you can come back to this town, Nuevo Laredo or Matamoros, and you can cross over for your court hearing on this date. You have to be back. So they would get dumped back, and then they come back for their court hearing, go to those tent courts all by themselves, almost impossible to get lawyers, although we tried to work that out, for a while. It was just really difficult. Have a real short sort of hearing and then kick back to wait some more. And people were kidnapped left and right. People that were sent to the Nuevo Laredo courthouse, a lot of them were kidnapped when they came back to try to, appear at their hearing. And then they were told, no, well, you didn't appear, so you've lost your case. That happened to a lot of women with kids that barely survived the kidnappings, right? On the very first night, there were a group of Cubans that they were here 5 days and were nearly kidnapped 3 times. So they ran to the river and managed to get across, and were handed those first little stubs of paper and sent up to Nuevo Laredo. And they were told, there's going to be a bus taking you to a safe house there. Don't worry, you're going to be completely safe in Monterrey. Everything's paid for. So they got dumped in the Nuevo Laredo parking lot of the immigration building, waiting for a bus for about 12 hours because it wasn't ready. And the woman with some children went across the street for food and never came back. And they're like, man, this is bad. And a group of women with children came running up crying and asked the immigration guy standing there, how do we get to this shelter? It's crazy out there. They're running after us, grabbing us everywhere. And he gave them directions, but another truck pulled up full of tattooed men with guns who jumped out and took the women away. And the Cuban said, help them. And he said, no, what happens outside these gates, that's outside the gates. A pastor was taking people in left and right, many of them. And the gangs came to him that night and said, we're going in and taking people. And he said no, and he was taken away, and he was never brought back. They never asked for a ransom, nothing. He's dead. There was a new group that came in that would drive around saying, La Mara Noroeste. It would be painted in bright red letters like blood on the side of a captured army vehicle. And it would say, Tropas del Infierno, the troops from hell. And you could see like burning buses out near the airport and everything. It was terrifying. But thousands and thousands and thousands were sent back to this entirely dangerous region and trapped here with the gangs just closing in on them. And that's when the woman that I told you about was kidnapped 3 times. First, almost her child was going to be sold for his organs, and second, she was in a shootout with 2 rival gangs lying on top of her child, and the third time she was gang raped in front of him. And the United States government sent her back again on the grounds that Mexico was perfectly safe. We ended up just hiding her out for a while. That was all we could do. I was trying to get her to Costa Rica, where they have much more normal legal standards. But then COVID hit and we couldn't get anyone out. With COVID, of course, came Title 42. Title 42, if you cross the river, they grab you, they take your fingerprints, and they send you right back. They don't even ask you if you're in danger. It didn't matter. They just sent you right back. They should have asked if there were minors or anything else. But I think here at the Reynosa stop, they wouldn't let people get sent back if they had a child under 5 or something. But there were many children under 5 that were sent back. There were pregnant women. There were women with newborn babies sent back. There were people suffering epileptic attacks. There were people with broken legs. I mean, it was just horrific. And they'd come through and they would be just mauled by Mexican immigration after the U.S. just tossed them right back. No food, no nothing. An old woman who became very ill afterwards and later died, for example. But they'd come down through the bridge then through Mexican immigration, who would take them to separate rooms and rob them blind and sexually attack several people by their reports and stuff. And then they'd come out and it's like, where do we go? Where do we go? And all of these shelters are farther up the river that are not right at the bridge, because the bridge area is the place where everyone gets kidnapped. So they came out and they ended up getting dumped in a little plaza just catacorner to the bridge. And it was a plaza that no one had really played football or done knitting or played music in a lot of years, right? For good reason, it's too dangerous. But people pitched tents and stuff and just kind of moved in because the shelters, were picking up people left and right, but they were smaller. There was Casa de Migrante that could hold maybe 200 people and is for 3 days. That's run by the Catholic Church. And then there was Senda de Vida 1, that was this place, and it at that time was really supposed to be for about 300 people. And there were some other small groups too that took in a few people, but those were the two major ones. And all of a sudden there were like 2,000 people in the plaza and stuff. So Pastor Hector, having gotten real desperate all through the COVID, as did the people at Casa de Migrantes, right? Like, where's the OIM? Where is UNICEF? Where is Red Cross? Where's anybody with this tidal wave of desperate people getting killed and kidnapped and raped? So Hector decided with his wife, to enlarge this shelter. And on their own, they got all of the migrants organized. And a lot of the migrants were professional welders or plumbers or bricklayers themselves, right? And they came right forward and built it with him. And they put in running water, no more portable toilets during the epidemic. There were showers, a food kitchen. They put in a new stove and everything, and went out and got 700 people out of the plaza and brought them here. And we were supposed to be able to get some people across on humanitarian parole, that their conditions were so terrible they should be allowed to cross instead of waiting in Mexico. But that program was very slow. We just did the best we could. It was for, physical problems, and immigration decided if they were in the mood to let them across or not. Sometimes we could get them across, sometimes we couldn't. There were phases when it got a little better. When Biden first came in, it looked like it was going to get a little better, but then it didn't. MPP ended when Biden did come in, although then it got hung up, in the courts, as you know. So I'm very happy to hear that it's now been struck down for good. I'm eager to read that opinion. But meanwhile, Title 42 is every bit as bad. You just get sent back without even being asked if you're in danger, with your children, with everybody, and you wait in Mexico until they decide that COVID isn't that dangerous anymore, although masks are optional. I gotta answer something here for one. And we're looking at the wave of the future, obviously, right? This stream of refugees is not going to stop. It's very lazy to say, oh, it's just climate change, right? No, it's not. It's the same death squads that have driven everybody out of Central America for the last century, with a whole lot of U.S. intervention, right? My husband was killed by a group of internal intelligence officials in Guatemalan military during the genocide, who were trained at the School of the Americas, and the declassified documents show that many of them were in fact on CIA payroll. They were paid informants or assets. This came out in the 90s. You were probably, I don't know if you were born yet, but it was 95. And we were all shocked. CIA was, because it was in black and white. We knew it was happening, but we had never seen it admitted before. But so the United States was paying these local, very corrupt military officers to carry out torture and assassinations. And we kept paying for it. My husband was one of many who ended up killed in that process. But some of those officers, they're all still up and free and walking around, and we will not release their files, which means they are safe from the war crimes trials until those are released. But also many of them are on the DEA corrupt officer list, meaning they're drug lords, which we've also always known, right? So if they're drug lords, they're the ones that are chasing everybody out of Guatemala and up to our borders. They're our friends. They're not being indicted as drug lords by the United States government because they're our former partners, where DEA is not allowed to go after them. So the same monsters that we created and trained and made very wealthy are now high-level drug lords doing the same torture and murder and terror techniques, driving people to our border. And we're like, no, you can't touch them. So we have a lot of nerve talking about immigrants that can't be bothered to fix their own countries that we've in fact destroyed and kept our boots on. So that's my 1 hour summary. A little bit pissed off about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I gotta see the lady who's almost fallen out of her wheelchair.